As you may have guessed with the title of this video, I played a ton of the multiplayer tech test. 42 hours I believe I put into it, and I made it a point to use every unit in the game and every ability in the game. I can't think of a single unit I haven't at least used more than twice, but I will throw in the disclaimer that I at least made an effort to try everything. If I missed a unit or ability or some glaring thing that you wished me to talk about, I won't be mad. Just let me know in the comments. I'll reply to you there. I think the first and most important thing I want to discuss about this test is if the game was fun or not. After all, it is a game. The short answer is yes. This game was a ton of fun. Perfect? Absolutely not, but it was certainly a lot better than I expected, and I actually had high standards for this game in terms of performance. Or maybe it's low standards. I'm not too sure. In a world where EA and Ubisoft constantly change the description of a functional game, and even more to the term releasable, I may just be baffled that the game even worked at all and didn't have an in-game shop open before the game is out. Regardless, not only did the game work with minimal bugs, none of them being game-breaking, but they also managed to make every faction except one interesting, balanced, and even fun to play. Speaking of the factions, let's start off with the Axis forces. The Wehrmacht and Company Heroes 3 can be described in one word: solid. These guys are good in the defense as well as they are on the offense, but never really feeling like they are too specialized in either. If I had to label them as either more offensive or defensive focused, I would have to say defensive, since they can build bunkers that can host MGs, medics, or even become a repair station. Not to mention, I believe every proper tank in their roster, except for the heavy tanks, can be hulled down very quickly and at no cost. However, the Pioneer squads are super weak, pathetic on the offense unless given a flamethrower, and with their low model count of 3, they struggle at repairing things quickly unless you have multiple squads of them. What makes Wehrmacht different from the other 3 factions, however, is their ability to transfer Grenadier squads. Grenadier squads are your main base infantry with a high model count, a grenade, and a snare. They cannot be upgraded with a single weapon at all unless their battle group has the ability to give them one, and although they have lackluster damage, they are very useful on the defense. What makes a Grenadier different from other infantry squads is the fact that once you tech up, depending on what building you have constructed, you can choose to transfer a specific Grenadier squad to change them to a different unit. Doing this is significantly cheaper than building a fresh unit from scratch, allowing you to use a ton more manpower for whatever else you need it for in the game. A solid jack-of-all-trades sort of faction, they don't have a glaring weakness, and they aren't too strong either. If they are lacking anything, it is call-in artillery, or any sort of ability meant to be used for dealing a ton of damage in a quick amount of time. Moving on to the next Axis faction, we have the Africa Corps. These guys are the definition of combined arms. I believe almost every, if not every, core unit in their roster comes with the combined arms ability at Veterancy 0, and is certainly a faction that has a clear-cut identity: stay mobile and stay mechanized. The infantry of this faction gain increased movement speed, accuracy, reduced accuracy to the enemy, and increased fire rates when they are nearby allied vehicles. Although this makes it sound like these buffs alone should make the infantry superior to their opponents, just by being near a vehicle, it usually is not enough to turn their infantry into superior variants of their opponents. There still needs to be thought put into what vehicle is needed to be used against your opponent. Although when compared to the Wehrmacht, their vehicles are more certainly inferior, they make up for this for their cheaper options and a variety of buffs that can be purchased throughout the match, and an overall greater variety in unit roster when it comes to armor and light vehicles. Another thing that separates them from the Wehrmacht is their greater ability to call in off-map artillery, either through battle group abilities or the reconnaissance truck that they have available in their roster. Although not as much of a jack-of-all-trades sort of faction, they do have great tools to deal with any problem they come across. They can even focus more on the defensive with the Italian infantry battle group. Speaking of Italians, this faction has Italian infantry and tanks available depending on what battle group you choose. The Italian tanks are cheaper than the already cheap Africa Corps tanks, but perform even worse than their German friends, except for the L6 with the upgraded flamethrower. That thing is nuts. Italian infantry, however, tend to steal the show away from the Germans if used correctly. Although none of the Italian infantry during the tech test, seem to have the combined arms buff, they don't need to be near a vehicle to pick up their slack. The Italian Todi squad comes with an SMG, not a SMG, everyone comes with SMGs, and can be upgraded with 2 flamethrowers, not to mention even construct demolition charges. The alternative to a mainline infantry unit is the Bersaglieri. That word. They are faster than their German friends, even with their combined arms buff. A unit that certainly excels at being a quick response infantry unit, although being slightly lackluster in the DPS department, unless upgraded later throughout the match. The last main thing to note about the Africa Corps is their reserve system. As the match progresses, call-in units become available that are way cheaper than what they honestly should be. These units can either be one of the variety of infantry squads, a Pack 38, or a League. All of these call-ins come with a half-track to support them on the battlefield. As the match progresses into the late game, however, the reserve system can be upgraded in order to provide a better reserves. These new and improved reserves now include a Panzer III supported by infantry, 2 Stugs, a Panzer IV supported by infantry, or a Tiger tank. Yes, these units still cost way less than what they should. Yes, I see this system being nerfed when the game releases. I watched a man roll out a Tiger tank a little over 12-minute mark. That was not okay. I apologize briefly for the lack of US footage in this video. I ran into issues with OBS while playing this game, and apparently the footage for the US got corrupted, so here's British gameplay instead. The US forces are the definition of flexibility, not necessarily because their units can handle any task, but because they have multiple choices on handling a specific task. This logic applies to most US units anyways. You see, the uniqueness in the US forces lies purely in their veterancy system. All US units in the game that have veterancy can pick between one of 2 abilities at veterancy 1. For example, the Rifleman squad has the option between an ability that allows them to slowly suppress a single squad over time, or they can choose the sprint ability. The Sherman tank has the option between temporarily loading HE shells for anti-infantry or a white phosphorus round to blind enemy tanks. These upgrades don't change the way the unit at its core works, like how it works at its core, but instead gives it more tools to handle certain tasks. Same could be said for the US base upgrades. The US can choose between an improvement in air support, mechanized support, or infantry support. Once you pick one of these paths, you can then purchase all of the buffs they have available. In terms of playstyle, the US is similar to the Africa Corps in the sense that they usually have to stay pretty mobile to make good use of their units. The standard US Rifleman squadsies come with a single Thompson SMG that greatly helps the squad handle close-range engagements and can be upgraded at Veterancy 1 to have sprint to close that distance. The engineer squads all have SMGs, and the scout sections have access to smoke grenades. Most US infantry are meant to dominate the close to mid-range battlefield, and to keep their opponent guessing on what abilities their units have, and what support center upgrade they've also picked. They certainly are a faction that not only rewards the preservation of the integrity of their squads, but also excel at being an unpredictable opponent. Options is the word that comes to mind whenever I think about describing this faction, and a player with good foresight can excel at using the US faction. Oh, and their armor is pretty solid too. What did you expect? It's US armor. It's either a Sherman, a bigger Sherman, or something that looks like a Sherman. It all works fine, don't worry about it. Now, if you remember from the start of the video, I mentioned that 3 out of the 4 factions were interesting, balanced, and fun to play. The British forces are the one exception to the 4 total factions. In all honesty, I cannot fully explain with absolute certainty why I did not enjoy this faction, but they were balanced, sure. They certainly were not interesting and fun to play. That's just my opinion, though. I found them to be a jack-of-all-trades sort of faction similar to the Wehrmacht, but doing so in a more detrimental way. They felt rather flavorless, or at least identityless. Sure, they had battle groups that gave access to Gurkha infantry and special Indian heavy mortars, but something was missing. Hell, even their tanks were super cool. My favorite tank in the game is the M3 Lee, and the rest of their armor was super fun to play with. I think the British have the most fun armor in the game, but something is missing, truly, to the identity of this faction. I'm just not sure what. If I had to guess, I believe it's their infantry gameplay. Their infantry doesn't really feel like they have an identity. Standard infantry section has 3 different weapon upgrades, one for anti-infantry, one for anti-tank, and one for recon and artillery. I can't really think about what exactly the infantry section is good at, or bad at either. All of the identity of this faction purely resides in their armor, if you ask me. Regardless, though, I do think that this is a very solid faction. The infantry isn't broken, the tanks aren't either, the battle group abilities are strong, but not too strong, except for maybe naval blockade, and they don't really have any weakness other than lack of good anti-air vehicles. I honestly can't really think of a proper solution to this problem other than give them more flavor, but even then I'm not too sure as to how. I really want to give a good description that really complements this faction in order to end this segment of the video, but all I can really think about is the phrase jack of all trades, and that's about it. So I guess we'll just leave it at that. They're a jack of all trades kind of faction. That's a brief and generic description of the factions in this game, through my eyes, that is. Now, let's talk about what's new in the game in terms of mechanics and such. You know, things that make it different from Company Heroes 1 and 2, and in terms of how the game actually works, and not necessarily just because a faction has something that we haven't seen before. You know, just the more generic changes of the game. Infantry combat in this game fundamentally is exactly the same as it is in Co 2, except there is now auto-vaulting, breaching, and everyone seems to be firing nerf rounds. Breaching is a new way to force an enemy squad out of a building and having your squad enter it. If done successfully, the squad that is being breached loses around half of its members almost every time, if not more than half. Breaching costs about 10 munitions less than a normal grenade throw, so in terms of cost it's better than a normal grenade, but in practice harder to pull off. Breaching takes longer and leaves the squad still vulnerable to fire, not to mention the squad that is being breached can just leave the building, so it shouldn't be seen as a bunch of free damage, but more of a guaranteed change of ownership for the building that is being breached. Team weapons, in this case really only MGs, are harder to escape from damage, but can still avoid the breach relatively easily. One thing left to point out about breaching is that just because a squad has a grenade doesn't mean that they can breach. Usually only squads specialized in CQC can breach, or assaulting in general. Unless you're playing the US forces, then in which their main infantry, the rifleman squad, can just breach once they have the grenades unlocked. The British forces Royal Engineers can also breach, but with a flamethrower, not because they have grenades. I'm not sure how much that's going to change by the time the game comes out, but I have a feeling, they're going to flip around what can breach and what can't, because it definitely did feel a little bit odd seeing what units could breach and what units couldn't. It's like, yes, every faction has a unit that can breach, but it's kind of awkward to see, okay, well, this elite, like, take paratroopers, for example, they can throw a cooked grenade, and, well, you probably would think an elite unit should be able to breach, but they just can't. Same thing goes for, the Axis variants as well. Just look at, well, actually, the Fallschirmjäger actually can breach, so. Okay, well, that just adds furthermore to my confusion, but, moving on. As for the bullets that are being fired from people's weapons, I cannot say with absolute certainty that they are real bullets. Like, this is nuts. Everyone has to be firing Nerf rounds, or they went to the Stormtrooper Academy from Star Wars. The time it takes for squads to kill each other at long range is absurd. I remember telling my friend while I was watching my Grenadier squad engage an enemy rifle squad at long range, both behind green cover, I told him, "It's been 30 seconds since these two squads engaged, and I don't think the health bars have moved a single bit." Now you might be thinking, well, CQC units should still kill faster up close, right? Well, the obvious answer is that yes. Yes, that of course, it's CQC unit. Of course it's going to kill faster up close, but their damage has also been toned down considerably. So don't be getting the idea that, like, if you remember for Code 2, watching shock troops or assault grenadiers melt squads at close range, that doesn't really happen here unless you allow the squad to chase your squad while it runs away. It's I don't want to say hard to explain, because it's rather easy to explain, but it's just kind of hard to envision because you don't really associate the image of, like, an assault grenadier squad standing in front of a rifleman squad and taking more than 10 seconds to kill that squad. Like, it should be faster. So So I'm not sure if close-range assault units are ever going to be all that meta. I mean, they could be. I don't know. It's too early to tell. This whole thing is subject to change, but yeah, you know, we'll see where this goes. Auto-vaulting is auto-vaulting. Do you really need an explanation? There's a fence. They jumped over it. There you go. Alright, now let's talk about movement. It's better, that's it. It's just better. No issues whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. Infantry squads have much more detailed animations for just about everything, and they have a certain momentum to them. Like, they don't just immediately start sprinting when you tell them to move when they're standing still, unless they have the sprint ability if you activate that. And when they head into cover, they will actually throw themselves into the cover, so to speak. As for tanks, though, I love the fact that they are much slower now, at least in comparison to Company Heroes 2. I know some people may dislike the fact that tanks move a lot slower, but I would like to remind you of Newton's first law. An object at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay in motion at a constant velocity unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Tanks in Co 2 don't know what friction is. Shut up, deal with it. I would like to point out, though, that this statement is almost exclusively for tanks and only tanks. Some light vehicles obey this law as well, but some others travel like they've skipped science class. Oh, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but a single infantry squad can ride on top of almost every tank. This is currently the most underused feature in the game. Believe me, it sounds kind of minor. Some of you geniuses out there are probably realizing the actual impact of that, but believe me, it is huge now that you can have an infantry squad right on top of a tank, both for flanking, just bringing a unit to the front from home base. I mean, it's pretty big. Don't sleep on that, is what I'm saying.
We have vehicles available in reserve.
Off-map artillery is just fine, but airstrikes are strong, to say the least. Strafing runs that are meant to deal actual damage, not just suppress, or just rocket runs in general, come in hard and fast. Like, these things will delete your entire unit if caught underneath it. 2 rockets hitting my Tiger tank from behind was enough to take it all the way down to half HP from full. Hell, even the strafing runs that suppress infantry can straight up delete an entire squad if they're caught straight in the middle of it. I mean, this makes sense realistically, because, you know, in the words of wise men, bullet do hurt, but this is a game, not real life. To be honest, though, I think these abilities are relatively balanced. No, it's not because I use them a bunch. I was actually, by far, a greater victim of them than the actual user of them. The main reason why I think it's balanced, though, is because the AA in this game is very, very strong, especially the big flat guns. Sure, there's a little bit of imbalance there that the Germans have only big flat guns, but the Allies have more options for air abilities, so, you know, take it as you will. Should everybody have the same amount of AA? I don't know. Should everybody have the same amount of air support? I don't know. But in terms of what I'm telling you right now, you just need to know that the AA in this game is super effective. Not just the big flat guns, but AA in general. But, like, when you call in these planes, the second they get into anti-air range, everything snaps to it and shoots it very, very quickly. If it's the big flat guns, it's almost a guaranteed kill. So if you call in a rocket strike in, like, the middle of the map, it doesn't matter if it's, like, 1v1 or 4v4, and it crosses the line of sight of a flat gun, that thing's just dead. You wasted your munitions. Like, it doesn't get to shoot a thing. It just dies before it gets there. So, is that balanced? I'm not sure. It's kind of new from what we're used to, at least. But at least in my opinion, I never really witnessed it too much in previous games. I'd call in a plane and it would at least drop its stuff, whether it be smoke pods or actual bombs or whatever, rockets, before it gets shot down. Then it immediately falls after it drops its stuff, but, you know, it's new like that here. So same thing can actually be said, too, when you call in, like, paratroopers. If you call in paratroopers, and a flat gun gets a view of that thing before you drop off its infantry, that thing, you say goodbye to your whole squad, it's just gone. Gets shot down immediately. And anyways, yeah. You know, rocket runs and strafing runs are also a lot cheaper and more effective than I certainly expected, but They can also straight up be useless if you have the right defenses. I like the idea, but I am not too sure if the execution is entirely balanced. I hope to see this stay in the game, though. I just think it needs a little bit of tweaking. But speaking of the cost of abilities, let's discuss the resources as a whole, shall we?
250 points remain.
Resources in this game, or at least resource gain, have kind of gone, in my opinion, through a minor rework of sorts. First off, manpower points are now a thing. In fact, it replaces the normal resource points from the previous game. You know, the points that give both a little fuel and a little munitions, that's now gone. Instead, every point either gives munitions, fuel, or manpower, but never more than one. Building a resource cache on such points will only boost that specific resource. You can't pick what kind of cache goes on it, and yes, that includes the manpower points as well. For the cost of abilities, everything seems to be very cheap, for better or for worse. There are plenty of abilities that felt like they would have an ability cost, but in the end, not having one at all. And most abilities in general are super cheap for what they can do. Part of this is thanks to the fact that you seem to gain munitions at a much higher rate than what we have seen in Company of Heroes 2. So in terms of cost, they should be doing fine, but it's the amount of munitions that people have that I think is responsible for this. In comparison to Company of Heroes 2, you most certainly are using far more abilities in a single match than what we have ever seen before. I found it quite fun, but I can understand some people being frustrated over the amount of ability spam in the game. Because, to an extent, this game did feel a little bit ability spammy, if that makes sense. It's not a term at all. I just made it up, but like it does feel like you can just kind of call in and just do more things at once. I personally enjoyed it, but I can definitely see it being a problem to some. I'll keep this short. I witnessed only two. One showing me this pop-up in the top left of my screen, and another one happening on a 2v2 map. On the 2v2 map, there was some cover in the middle of a city where my infantry squads would often get one model stuck in, and I could not get that infantry model out until I basically ran around constantly around that cover until, for whatever miracle, the guy eventually gets unstuck. But I don't know exactly what specific movement I had to do. Regardless, that shouldn't happen at all. That's definitely something that needs to be worked on. But in terms of game-breaking bugs, I experienced zero. I remember I'm on the Company of Heroes official Discord server, and they released a patch one day to fix a bunch of apparently crashing bugs. My game ran very stable, and it felt very stable. I feel like my opinion here is going to be a little bit biased because for me, everything worked. For other people, it didn't work as smoothly, so take that with a grain of salt. I say it works just fine, but, you know, other people didn't have it work so well for them. In terms of performance of this game, though, it ran super smoothly for me when I turned off VSync, because that's on by default for some reason. Same thing with uncapped FPS. Or uncapped FPS is turned off. So, turn it on. Unless you only want to see 60 FPS for whatever reason. But regardless, if they keep that in when the game releases, immediately go in. If you hate VSync like myself, turn off VSync. If you hate uncapped FPS, no, wait, I love uncapped FPS. If you love uncapped FPS, you turn that on, because it's turned off by default. You'd think reading a script would be easy, but apparently not. Hey, so I have no idea how to create an ending to a video. Hell, I have no idea how to create an intro to a video either. I just had to, like, force that one on you guys. But, thank you for making it this far. If for whatever reason you've stuck around. I'm not really expecting this to gain much traction or anything like that. And I'm not really gonna, you know, come here at the very end to give you an excuse of, oh, my stuff is bad because I'm new at this. So, therefore, you should stick around or whatever. I'm actually not really doing this too much for much of an audience per se. I'm not really looking into making much of a career out of this unless I enjoy it more in the future. I'm actually just kind of here to learn how to use video editing software, which I'm currently enjoying how to use, and I'm just trying to find reasons and excuses to post things, you know. Like I'm definitely going to be making more videos. I just don't know on what exactly. I've been sitting here for a little while trying to figure out like what the next video is going to be on. I don't know. I might just be some goofy stuff for me to screw around with editing, like I said, and maybe I'll find something new to talk about. I don't know. I just figured Company Heroes 3 is coming out soon, and I did take part in that multiplayer tech test, which I really liked. And yeah, I just figured I was like, all right, that's a decent start to do so. So just wanted to say, you know, thank you again for making it this long, if you even have made it this long. And yeah, I have no idea what to tell you guys if I'm gonna make anything new, if you even care to watch anything more. But yeah, just anyways, thank you for making it this far. I guess I have a feeling I know that 2 people that will actually make it this far. Don't worry, I'll harass your asses online later. I'll get to y'all soon. Anyways, have a good one, boys. Unless you're Thomas, I know who you are. Yeah, that's right, Thomas. I know you made it this far in the video. Sue me. Leave a comment. Leave a dislike, Thomas. Leave a dislike. I know that nobody in this world is going to see that shit except me. Do it. Do it, Thomas. Do it. You won't.